had been a security guard at hospital for 12 years. His weathered hands gripped the radio as he walked the empty corridors at 3 in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows that danced across the polished floors. He knew every corner of this place, every hiding spot where teenagers tried to smoke, every loose door handle that needed fixing. At 52 had seen everything. Car accident victims rushed in bleeding and broken, families saying goodbye to loved ones, new mothers holding their bobbies for the first time. He had become part of the furniture here, a steady presence that doctors and nurses relied on. When things got chaotic was the calm in the storm. Tonight felt different, though. Earlier that day, his supervisor William had called him into the office. William was a thin man with nervous eyes who always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. He had been promoted to head of security 6 months ago and still wasn't sure what to make of him. "I need to talk to you about something important," William had said, closing the door behind them. The office was small and cramped, filled with filing cabinets and security monitors showing different areas of the hospital. Had sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair across from William's desk. "What's going on, boss?" William had shuffled through some papers on his desk, avoiding eye contact. "There's going to be some changes around here. Budget cuts, you know how it is. The board is looking at reducing our security coverage during certain hours." "Which hours?" had asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. "Midnight to 6 a.m. They think the overnight shift isn't necessary anymore. Most of the hospital is quiet during those hours anyway." Had felt his stomach drop. The overnight shift was his domain. He knew which patients couldn't sleep and wandered the halls. He knew which doors were supposed to stay locked and which ones needed to remain open for emergency access. He had prevented 3 break-ins in the past 2 years alone, all during the overnight hours. "That doesn't make sense, William. You know as well as I do that we need someone here overnight. What about the psychiatric ward? What about the emergency department? Things happen at night." William had looked uncomfortable, still shuffling his papers. "The decision has already been made. Starting next week, you'll be working day shifts only, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. "Day shifts," had repeated. "But I've been working nights for 8 years. My whole life is built around this schedule, and what about Charlotte?" Charlotte was an elderly patient in the long-term care wing. She had been at for 2 years now and had developed a special fondness for her. She suffered from dementia and often became confused and frightened during the night. Had gotten into the habit of checking on her during his rounds, sitting with her when she couldn't sleep, helping the nurses when she became agitated. "Charlotte will be fine," William had said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The nursing staff can handle any issues that come up." Had stood up from his chair, feeling angry and confused. "This isn't about budget cuts, is it? There's something else going on here." William had finally looked up at him and had seen something in his eyes that looked like fear. "Just follow orders. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Now, as walked his final overnight shift, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He had worked in security long enough to recognize when someone was lying, and William had definitely been lying. But about what? He stopped outside Charlotte's room and peered through the small window in the door. She was awake, sitting up in her bed and staring at the wall. Even in the dim light, could see the confusion and fear in her eyes. He knocked softly and entered the room. "Hey there, Charlotte, can't sleep again." Charlotte turned to look at him and for a moment saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Is that you?" "Yes, it's me, I'm here." He pulled up a chair next to her bed and sat down. "What's got you up tonight?" "They were here again," she whispered, looking around the room nervously. "The men in suits, they were asking questions about my son." Frowned. Charlotte often talked about people who weren't there, but something about the way she said this made him pay attention. "What kind of questions?" "About the money, about what he told me before he died. They want to know where he hid it." Charlotte's son had died 3 years ago in a car accident. Knew this because Charlotte talked about him often, sometimes forgetting that he was gone. But this was the first time she had mentioned anything about money or men in suits. "Charlotte, when did these men come to see you?" "Yesterday, or was it today? I can't remember. Time gets all mixed up in here." She grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "But they scared me. They said they would hurt me if I didn't tell them what they wanted to know." Felt a chill run down his spine. If someone had actually been threatening Charlotte, the nursing staff should have reported it. but no one had said anything to him about any visitors causing problems. "Did you tell the nurses about these men?" Charlotte shook her head. "They don't believe me. They think I'm just confused again, but I know what I saw. These men were real." Squeezed her hand gently. "I believe you, Charlotte. Can you describe what these men looked like?" One was tall and thin, like a scarecrow. The other was shorter and had mean eyes. They wore dark suits and carried briefcases. They said they were from the government, but they didn't show me any badges. His mind was racing. Government agents asking about money that Charlotte's son had supposedly hidden. It sounded like something out of a movie, but Charlotte's fear seemed genuine. And now William was suddenly changing his schedule, making sure he wouldn't be here overnight to keep an eye on things. "Charlotte, I need you to listen to me carefully. If these men come back, I want you to press your call button immediately. Don't talk to them, don't answer any questions. Just call for the nurses right away. Can you do that for me?" She nodded but could see the confusion creeping back into her eyes. "You'll be here, won't you? You're always here at night." Felt his heart break a little. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe, Charlotte. That's a promise." He stayed with her until she fell asleep, then made his way to the security office. He needed to check the visitor logs from the past few days. If these men had actually been here, there should be some record of their visit. The security office was located in the basement of the hospital, down a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Had always liked it down here. It was quiet and away from the chaos of the upper floors. But tonight, the isolation felt ominous. He sat down at his desk and pulled up the visitor logs on his computer. The system tracked everyone who entered and left the hospital, including the time of their visit and who they were there to see. Scrolled through the entries from the past week, looking for anything unusual. Most of the entries were routine. Family members visiting patients, delivery drivers, medical equipment technicians. But then he saw something that made him pause. 2 entries from yesterday afternoon. J. Smith and R. Jones listed as visitors for Charlotte Henderson. The times showed they had been in the hospital for over an hour. Frowned, those names were so generic they had to be fake, and Charlotte rarely had any visitors. Her son had been her only family, and he was dead. Who were these men, and why were they using false names? He scrolled back further, checking the previous days. There were more entries. The same fake names appearing every few days for the past 2 weeks, always visiting Charlotte. How had he missed this? He usually kept a close eye on the visitor logs, but he had been distracted lately with talk of budget cuts and schedule changes. Printed out the visitor logs and stuffed them into his pocket. He needed to talk to someone about this, but who? William was clearly involved in whatever was going on. The nursing staff might not take him seriously, especially if they thought Charlotte was just confused. He decided to check the security cameras. Every area of the hospital was monitored, and the footage was stored for 30 days. If these men had really been here, he should be able to see them on camera. The camera system was old and not always reliable, but knew how to work it. He pulled up the footage from yesterday afternoon and fast-forwarded to the time when the visitors had checked in. The main lobby camera showed 2 men in dark suits approaching the reception desk. Just as Charlotte had described, one was tall and thin, the other shorter with sharp features. Watched as they signed in and received visitor badges. They moved with the confidence of people who were used to getting what they wanted. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, seemed nervous as she spoke with them. She kept glancing around as if looking for help. Switched to the camera that covered the corridor leading to Charlotte's wing. He watched the 2 men walk down the hallway, checking room numbers until they found Charlotte's room. They went inside and stayed for almost an hour. When they came out, the shorter man was carrying a small recording device. His blood ran cold. These men weren't just asking questions, they were recording Charlotte's answers. This wasn't some random visit from confused government agents. This was a planned operation. He switched to the camera that covered Charlotte's room, but the angle only showed the doorway. He couldn't see or hear what was happening inside, but he could see Charlotte's body language when the men left. She was huddled in her bed, clearly frightened. Printed out screenshots from the camera footage and added them to his growing collection of evidence. He was starting to piece together a picture, but he still didn't understand what these men wanted or why William was helping them. His radio crackled to life, making him jump. "This is dispatch. We've got a situation in the emergency department. Can you respond?" Grabbed his radio. "On my way." He locked the evidence in his desk drawer and headed upstairs. The emergency department was buzzing with activity despite the late hour. Ambulances were arriving with victims from a multi-car accident, and the staff was scrambling to treat everyone. Dr. Williams, the head of the emergency department, spotted as soon as he arrived. "Thank God you're here. We've got reporters trying to get in, and some of the families are getting aggressive. Can you help keep things under control?" Nodded and got to work. For the next 2 hours, he helped manage the chaos. He kept reporters at bay, guided family members to the waiting area, and made sure the ambulance bay stayed clear for incoming patients. This was the kind of work that reminded him why his job mattered. As the situation calmed down, Dr. Williams pulled him aside. "I heard about the schedule change," she said quietly. "I want you to know that I fought against it. We need you here overnight." "Thanks, Doc. I appreciate that. Can I ask you something? Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Any strange visitors or people asking questions they shouldn't be asking?" Dr. Williams looked puzzled. "What kind of questions?" "About patients. Specifically about patients who might have information about money or valuable items." "That's oddly specific. Is there something going on I should know about?" Hesitated. He trusted Dr. Williams, but he wasn't sure how far this conspiracy went. For all he knew, she could be involved too. "Just keeping my eyes open. You know how it is." She nodded, but could see she wasn't satisfied with his answer. "If there's something going on that affects patient safety, you need to tell me." "I will, Doc, I promise." As walked back to his office, he thought about Dr. Williams' words. Patient safety was exactly what he was worried about. Charlotte was vulnerable and scared, and these mysterious men were clearly pressuring her for information about something valuable that her son had supposedly hidden. But what could Charlotte's son have hidden that was worth this much trouble? He had been a simple mechanic who lived in a small apartment. Had met him a few times when he visited Charlotte. He seemed like a decent guy, nothing special about him. Unless there was more to the story than new. Back in his office, pulled out the evidence he had collected and spread it across his desk. The visitor logs, the camera screenshots, and his notes about Charlotte's story. He stared at the pieces of the puzzle, trying to make sense of it all. Charlotte's son, David Henderson, had died 3 years ago in what was officially ruled an accidental car crash. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if David had been involved in something dangerous, something that had gotten him killed? Turned to his computer and started searching for information about David Henderson's death. The newspaper archives showed a brief article about the accident. David had been driving home from work late one night when his car had gone off the road and hit a tree. The police had found no evidence of alcohol or drugs, and there were no other vehicles involved. It was ruled an accident caused by driver fatigue. But had been a security guard long enough to know that sometimes accidents weren't accidents, and sometimes people died because they knew something they weren't supposed to know. He dug deeper, looking for any other information about David Henderson. Most of what he found was routine: employment records, tax information, a few traffic tickets. But then he found something interesting. 6 months before his death, David had made several large deposits into his bank account. The amounts were significant, far more than a mechanic should have been making. Sat back in his chair, pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. David Henderson had come into some money before his death. Money that he had apparently hidden somewhere before these mysterious men could get their hands on it. Now they were pressuring his elderly, confused mother to tell them where it was. But why now? Why wait 3 years to start looking for this money? His radio crackled again. "All units, this is dispatch. We have reports of an unauthorized person in the long-term care wing. Can someone respond?" His heart stopped. Charlotte's wing. He grabbed his radio and keys and ran for the elevator. The long-term care wing was on the 4th floor, and the elevator seemed to take forever. His mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. What if those men had come back? What if they were pressuring Charlotte again, this time without any witnesses? When the elevator doors finally opened, could see a figure at the end of the hallway, near Charlotte's room. It was a man in a dark suit, and he was talking to someone on a cell phone. Couldn't hear what he was saying, but his posture suggested he was agitated. Approached carefully, not wanting to escalate the situation. As he got closer, he could see that it was the shorter man from the security camera footage, the one with the mean eyes that Charlotte had described. "Excuse me," called out. "Can I help you with something?" The man turned around and could see the coldness in his eyes that Charlotte had talked about. "I'm just visiting a patient, nothing to concern yourself with." "Visiting hours ended 6 hours ago," replied, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I'm going to need to see some identification." The man reached into his jacket and for a moment thought he might be reaching for a weapon. But he pulled out a leather wallet and flashed a badge too quickly for to read it. "Federal agent," the man said. "I'm conducting an investigation." If you're a federal agent, then you know you need to coordinate with hospital administration before interviewing patients, especially patients in long-term care who may have cognitive impairments. The man's jaw tightened. "This is a matter of national security. I don't need permission from hospital administrators." "Maybe not," said, "but you do need permission from me to be on this floor after visiting hours. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." For a moment, the two men stared at each other, could feel the tension crackling in the air. He was acutely aware that he was alone on this floor with a man who might be dangerous, with no backup coming. Finally, the man smiled, but it was a cold, predatory smile. "I'll be back," he said, "and next time I suggest you mind your own business." He walked past toward the elevator, close enough that could smell his expensive cologne. As he passed, he whispered, "You have no idea what you're getting involved in, old man. Walk away before you get hurt." Stood his ground until he heard the elevator doors close. Then he rushed to Charlotte's room, his heart pounding. Charlotte was awake and clearly terrified. She was huddled under her blankets, tears streaming down her face. "Charlotte, are you okay? Did that man hurt you?" She shook her head but could see she was barely holding herself together. He said, if I don't tell them what they want to know, they'll hurt other people, people I care about. He said they'll hurt you." Felt a surge of anger. Threatening an elderly woman with dementia was bad enough, but now they were threatening him too. These people clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. "Charlotte, listen to me. I want you to know that you're safe. I'm going to make sure these men don't bother you anymore." "But how? You won't even be here anymore. William said you're not working nights anymore." The mention of William's name confirmed what had already suspected. William wasn't just complying with orders from above. He was actively involved in whatever was happening here. "Don't worry about William," said. "I'm going to take care of this." He stayed with Charlotte until she calmed down, then made his way back to his office. He had a lot of thinking to do and not much time to do it. His final overnight shift would be over in a few hours, and after that, he wouldn't have the access he needed to protect Charlotte or investigate what was really going on. But wasn't the kind of man who walked away from a fight, especially when it involved protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. Whatever David Henderson had been involved in, whatever money he had hidden, was going to find out the truth. And he was going to make sure Charlotte stayed safe, no matter what it cost him. The next morning, sat in his car outside hospital, watching the sunrise paint the building in shades of orange and gold. He had barely slept after his shift ended, his mind churning with everything he had discovered. The evidence was locked in his desk drawer, but the weight of it felt heavy on his shoulders. He needed help, but he wasn't sure who to trust. William was clearly compromised. The nursing staff might not believe him or might inadvertently tip off the wrong people. The police would want more evidence than he currently had. But there was one person who might listen to him, Dr. Williams. Walked into the hospital with a sense of purpose. His day shift didn't start for another hour, but he wanted to catch Dr. Williams before things got busy. The emergency department was quieter during the morning hours, mostly dealing with routine cases rather than the chaos of trauma and accidents that came later. He found Dr. Williams in her office, reviewing patient charts and drinking what looked like her third cup of coffee. She looked up when he knocked on her door frame. "You're here early. I thought your new schedule didn't start until next week." "We need to talk, Doc, about patient safety, about Charlotte Henderson specifically." Dr. Williams set down her coffee and gestured for him to sit down. "I knew something was bothering you last night. What's going on?" Closed the door and sat down across from her desk. He pulled out printed copies of the visitor logs and camera screenshots from his pocket. "Someone has been visiting Charlotte regularly for the past 2 weeks. Men claiming to be federal agents, using fake names, threatening her to get information about money her dead son supposedly hid." Dr. Williams took the papers and examined them carefully. Her expression grew more serious as she read. These visitor entries, I would have been if federal agents wanted to interview one of our patients. That's protocol. They're not real federal agents, at least not the kind who follow protocols. Last night, one of them was here after visiting ours, pressuring Charlotte. When I confronted him, he threatened me. This is serious. If someone is threatening patients, Dr. Williams picked up her phone. I'm calling security. No, said quickly. William is involved. He's the one who suddenly decided to remove me from the overnight shift, right when these visits started happening. We can't trust hospital security right now. Dr. Williams put down the phone, her expression troubled. You're saying our own head of security is involved in some kind of conspiracy to threaten an elderly patient. I know how it sounds, but look at the evidence. The timing isn't a coincidence. Dr. Williams studied the papers again. Okay, let's say you're right. What do these men want from Charlotte? She's been here for 2 years with progressive dementia. She barely remembers what she had for breakfast. They want to know where her son David hid some money. Before he died 3 years ago, he made several large deposits into his bank account. Money he shouldn't have had as a mechanic. So you think David was involved in something illegal? Maybe, or maybe he witnessed something he shouldn't have, or someone paid him to keep quiet about something. Either way, these men think he told his mother where he hid whatever money was left. Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair, processing the information. Even if that's true, Charlotte's condition makes her an unreliable witness. Her memory comes and goes. She couldn't give them accurate information even if she wanted to. That's what makes this so cruel, said. They're pressuring a confused, frightened old woman who probably doesn't even understand what they're asking for, and they're threatening to hurt people she cares about if she doesn't cooperate. People like you. Yeah, which means they've been watching closely enough to know that Charlotte and I have developed a friendship. These aren't random thugs, Doc. They're organized and they've been planning this. Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against her desk. What do you want me to do? I can't exactly ban visitors without cause, and if they're claiming to be federal agents. I want you to help me protect Charlotte, and I want you to help me find out what really happened to David Henderson. I'm a doctor, not a detective. But you have access to David's medical records from when Charlotte was first admitted. You have contacts in other hospitals, other medical facilities. If David was injured before he died, if there were signs that his car accident wasn't really an accident, you might be able to find evidence that I can't. Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, she nodded. Okay, I'll help you, but we do this carefully, and if we find evidence of a crime, we go to the police immediately. Agreed. Give me a few hours to look into David's medical history. In the meantime, I'll make sure the nursing staff on Charlotte's floor knows to call me immediately if anyone tries to visit her outside of normal visiting hours. Felt a wave of relief. Having Dr. Williams as an ally changed everything. She had the authority and resources he needed to protect Charlotte properly. There's something else, said. I think we should talk to Charlotte when she's having one of her clearer moments. She might remember more than these men think she does. That's possible. Dementia patients often have periods of clarity, especially about events from their past. But we have to be careful not to cause her additional stress. Spent the rest of the morning on his new day shift, but his heart wasn't in it. He kept thinking about Charlotte alone on the 4th floor, vulnerable to another visit from those men. During his lunch break, he went up to check on her. Charlotte was awake and seemed more alert than usual. She smiled when she saw him. I wasn't expecting to see you during the day. My schedule changed, remember, but I wanted to check on you. How are you feeling today? Better, clearer, if that makes sense. Sometimes my mind feels like it's wrapped in fog, but today the fog has lifted a bit. Sat down next to her bed. This might be his chance to get some real answers. Charlotte, yesterday you told me about some men who came to visit you, men asking about your son David. Do you remember that? Her expression grew serious. Yes, I remember. They scared me. They wanted to know about the money David left me, but I don't know what money they're talking about. Did David ever talk to you about money, about hiding something valuable? Charlotte was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. David was always worried about money after he lost his job at the auto shop. He was having trouble finding work, and I knew he was struggling to pay his rent. But then he found another job. Yes, but it was different. He wouldn't tell me what he was doing, just said it was temporary work that paid well. He seemed nervous about it, jumpy, not like himself. Leaned forward. Did he ever bring you any money or ask you to hold on to something for him? There was something. Charlotte's voice trailed off and could see her struggling to remember. A box. He brought me a small box and asked me to keep it safe, said it was important papers, but I shouldn't open it or tell anyone about it. Felt his pulse quicken. Do you still have the box? Charlotte looked confused again, the clarity starting to fade. I don't remember, it's all so mixed up in my head. That's okay, Charlotte, you're doing great. Can you remember anything else about the box? What it looked like, where David told you to put it? It was metal about the size of a shoebox, heavy for its size, David said. She paused, pressing her fingers to her temples. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to someone trustworthy, someone who would know what to do with it. Did he say what was in the box? Evidence, Charlotte said suddenly, the word coming out clear and strong. He said it was evidence that some bad people would want to destroy, evidence that could help put them in prison. Felt a chill run down his spine. David Henderson hadn't been involved in something illegal. He had been trying to expose something illegal, and whoever he was trying to expose had killed him for it. Charlotte, this is very important. Do you remember where you put the box? But the moment of clarity was fading. Charlotte looked around the room in confusion, as if she wasn't sure where she was. Box? What box? Why are you asking me about a box? Squeezed her hand gently. It's okay, Charlotte, you did great, just rest now. He stayed with her until she fell asleep, then hurried back to find Dr. Williams. She was in her office, looking grim as she read from a computer screen. I found David Henderson's medical records, she said without looking up. You were right to be suspicious about his death. Sat down across from her desk. What did you find? David was treated here in the emergency department 3 times in the 6 months before he died, twice for injuries that were inconsistent with his explanations. A broken wrist that he claimed happened when he fell off a ladder, but the break pattern suggested he had been grabbed and twisted. Bruised ribs that he said came from a car door slamming on him, but the bruising pattern was consistent with being punched repeatedly. Someone was beating him up. It looks that way, and there's more. I called a friend of mine who works at the county coroner's office. She was able to pull David's autopsy report. I thought you said his death was ruled accidental. It was, but that doesn't mean the coroner didn't have questions. According to the report, David had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, cuts and bruises that suggested he had been in a fight shortly before his death. Felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So someone beat him up, then made it look like he lost control of his car. That's what it looks like to me. But here's the interesting part. The coroner noted that David's car had been tampered with. The brake lines had been cut, but they were cut in a way that would cause gradual failure rather than immediate failure. Whoever did it wanted to make sure David would be driving at highway speed when his brakes failed. That's not an accident, that's murder. No, it's not. But apparently the investigating officer decided that the brake lines had been damaged in the crash itself, not beforehand. The case was closed as accidental death. Stood up and began packing around the small office. So David had evidence of some crime, someone was pressuring him to hand it over, and when he refused, they killed him. Now they're back looking for whatever evidence he had, and they think he told his mother where to find it. But Charlotte doesn't remember having any box, Dr. Williams pointed out. She did remember, at least partially. She said David gave her a metal box about the size of a shoebox, heavy for its size, filled with evidence that could put bad people in prison. She was supposed to give it to someone trustworthy if anything happened to David. Dr. Williams looked thoughtful. If Charlotte still had this box when she was admitted to the hospital, it would be with her personal effects. Everything patients bring with them gets cataloged and stored. Can we check? We can try, but if this box is as important as it seems, someone might have already taken it. They made their way to the patient storage facility in the basement of the hospital. It was a large room filled with numbered shelves, each holding boxes and bags of personal belongings from current and former patients. Charlotte's box was easy to find, but when Dr. Williams opened it, they found only clothing, a few photographs, and some costume jewelry. If there was a metal box, it's not here, Dr. Williams said. Maybe Charlotte hid it somewhere else before she was admitted, somewhere she thought it would be safe. But where? She was living in a small apartment, and her landlord told me that her family had cleared out all her belongings when she moved here. Thought about Charlotte's clearer moments, the times when her memory seemed to work better. She said David told her to give the box to someone trustworthy, someone who would know what to do with it. Maybe she did give it to someone. Who? I don't know, but I think we need to find out more about David's life. Who his friends were, who he worked with, who he might have trusted with something this important. Dr. Williams checked her watch. I have to get back to the emergency department, but you're right, we need more information. As walked back to his security rounds, he felt a mix of excitement and dread. They were getting closer to the truth, but the truth was more dangerous than he had imagined. David Henderson had been murdered because he had evidence of some serious crime, and now the same people who killed him were threatening Charlotte. But Charlotte might have already given the evidence to someone else, someone David trusted. If could find that person, he could get the evidence to the police and put an end to this whole nightmare. The problem was that he was running out of time. His overnight shifts were ending, and without access to the hospital at night, he wouldn't be able to protect Charlotte from future visits. He needed to solve this mystery quickly before those men decided that threatening Charlotte wasn't enough. During his afternoon break, drove to David Henderson's old neighborhood. It was a working-class area filled with small apartments and older homes. He found David's former apartment building and spoke to the landlord, an elderly man named Frank who remembered David well. "Good kid," Frank said. "Quiet, paid his rent on time. I was sorry to hear about the accident." Did David have many friends, people who came to visit him? Not many. He was kind of a loner after he lost his job at the auto shop. But there was one guy who came around sometimes. Tony something, I think. They used to work together. Do you know Tony's last name, or where he works now? Sorry, kid, that was 3 years ago. My memory isn't what it used to be. Drove to the auto shop where David used to work. It was a small operation run by an older man who remembered David fondly, but couldn't provide much useful information about his friends or personal life. David was a good mechanic, but he kept to himself mostly, never talked much about what he did outside of work. Was starting to feel frustrated. Without more information about David's life, he couldn't figure out who might have the evidence box, and time was running out. His radio crackled to life. "This is dispatch. You're needed in the long-term care wing immediately. There's been an incident." His blood turned to ice. He raced back to the hospital and took the stairs 2 at a time up to the 4th floor. A crowd had gathered outside Charlotte's room, including several nurses and Dr. Williams. "What happened?" asked. One of the nurses, a young woman named Jennifer, looked shaken. "We found Charlotte on the floor. She was trying to get out of bed by herself, which is unusual for her. When we asked her what was wrong, she said men were coming to hurt her friends." "Is she injured?" "Just some bruises from the fall, but she was completely lucid when she told us about the men, more lucid than I've seen her in months." Dr. Williams pulled aside. "I think someone may have given her medication to enhance her cognitive function temporarily. There are drugs that can briefly improve memory and mental clarity in dementia patients." "You mean those men drugged her to make her remember?" "It's possible. If they gave her something like a cholinesterase inhibitor, it could temporarily reverse some of the effects of her dementia. But it would be dangerous and unethical to do it without medical supervision." Felt sick. These people were willing to drug an elderly woman to risk her health and safety, just to get information about a box that might not even exist anymore. "I need to talk to her." "She's resting now, but you can see her briefly." Entered Charlotte's room quietly. She was awake and looked at him with eyes that were clearer than he had seen them in a long time. "I remember now. I remember everything about the box." "Charlotte, are you feeling okay? The nurses said you fell." "I'm fine, but listen to me carefully because I don't know how long this clarity will last. David gave me that box, and I knew I had to hide it somewhere safe, somewhere those men would never think to look." "Where did you hide it, Charlotte?" She smiled, and for a moment could see the sharp, intelligent woman she must have been before the dementia took hold. "I gave it to Father at church. David always said that if you needed someone you could trust completely, you went to Father, so that's what I did." Felt a surge of hope. Church was only a few miles away. If the box was still there, if Father still had it, then they finally had a chance to put an end to this nightmare. Charlotte, you did the right thing. David would be proud of you. I hope so, she said, but already could see the confusion creeping back into her eyes. Whatever those men had given her was wearing off. As left Charlotte's room, he was already planning his next move. He would go to church and find Father. He would get David's evidence box and take it to the police. And he would make sure that the people who killed David Henderson and threatened Charlotte finally faced justice. But first, he had to make sure Charlotte was safe, because once those men realized she had remembered where the box was, they would have no more use for her, and had a terrible feeling that they weren't the kind of people who left loose ends. Drove through the narrow streets of downtown, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he navigated towards church. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings and couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every dark sedan that appeared in his mirror made him nervous. Every person walking on the sidewalk seemed to be looking at him too closely. His church was an old brick building nestled between a small grocery store and a laundromat. Had driven past it countless times over the years, but had never been inside. He wasn't particularly religious, but as he approached the heavy wooden doors, he found himself hoping that Father would be the kind of man David Henderson had believed him to be. The interior of the church was cool and quiet, with afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns on the worn wooden pews. Could smell candle wax and old wood, scents that reminded him of his childhood when his grandmother used to drag him to Sunday services. A man in his 60s with graying hair and kind eyes emerged from a side door near the altar. He wore simple black clothing and a white collar, and his face had the weathered look of someone who had spent years listening to other people's problems. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice carrying a slight Hispanic accent. "Are you Father?" "I am, and you are?" "I'm a security guard at hospital. I need to ask you about David Henderson." Father's expression grew serious. "David Henderson, I haven't heard that name in some time. Please, let's sit down." He gestured toward one of the front pews and sat down beside him. The silence in the church felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. "David was a troubled young man when I knew him," Father said. "He came to me seeking guidance about a moral dilemma he was facing. I tried to help him, but I'm afraid I may not have given him the right advice." "What kind of moral dilemma?" Father was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. David had witnessed something at his workplace, something illegal that involved people in positions of authority. He was torn between speaking out and protecting himself and his mother. "What did he witness?" "I can't share the specifics of what David told me in confidence, but I can tell you that it involved corruption, bribery, and the endangering of innocent people's lives. David had documented evidence of what he had seen. Felt his pulse quicken, evidence that he gave to his mother to keep safe." Father nodded slowly. David was being pressured by dangerous people to stay quiet about what he knew. When the pressure turned to threats, he decided he needed to hide the evidence somewhere safe. He brought it to his mother, but then became worried that she might be in danger too. "So Charlotte brought the evidence to you?" "Yes, one day, about 2 weeks before David's death, Charlotte came to me with a metal box. She said David had asked her to give it to someone she trusted completely, someone who would know what to do with it if anything happened to him. She was already showing signs of memory problems at that time, but she was still clear about what David wanted her to do." "Do you still have the box?" Father stood up and walked toward the altar. "Follow me." He led through a side door into a small office filled with books, papers, and religious artifacts. Behind his desk was an old safe, the kind that banks used 50 years ago. Father knelt down and began turning the combination dial. "I kept the box safe all these years, hoping that someday the right person would come asking for it. I always wondered if David's death was really an accident." The safe opened with a satisfying click, and Father reached inside to pull out a metal box about the size of a shoebox, just as Charlotte had described. It was heavier than it looked, and could hear something shifting inside when Father handed it to him. "I never opened it," Father said. "David and Charlotte both trusted me to keep it safe until the right time came. I believe that time is now." Set the box on Father's desk and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, he found a collection of documents, photographs, and what looked like financial records. There were also several USB drives and a small digital camera. The documents appeared to be official reports from the city's building inspection department, but they had been altered. Original inspection reports showing serious safety violations had been changed to show that buildings had passed inspection. The photographs showed the same buildings, with obvious structural problems, dangerous electrical wiring, and other code violations that should have prevented them from being occupied. Jesus whispered as he flipped through the evidence. David worked for the building inspection department. Yes, but only for a few months. He had been hired as a temporary assistant to help with a backlog of inspections, but what he found there horrified him. Continued examining the contents of the box. The financial records showed payments being made from construction companies to city officials, including the head of the building inspection department. The amounts were substantial, clearly bribes to ensure that buildings would pass inspection regardless of their actual safety. One of the USB drives contained video files. Opened Father's laptop and inserted the drive. The videos showed city inspectors accepting envelopes of cash from construction supervisors and then filing false reports that certified buildings as safe when they clearly weren't. How many buildings are we talking about? Asked. According to what David told me, dozens. Apartment complexes, office buildings, even a school. All of them passed inspection with serious safety violations that could result in collapse, fire, or other disasters. Felt sick as he realized the scope of what David had uncovered. This wasn't just corruption. It was a conspiracy that was putting thousands of innocent people at risk every day. And David Henderson had been killed to keep it quiet. Father, I need to ask you something important. Have you noticed anyone watching the church lately? Anyone asking questions about David or about you? Father's expression grew troubled. As a matter of fact, yes. For the past several weeks, I've noticed the same car parked across the street at different times of day. And yesterday, a man came to the church asking about my relationship with the Henderson family. He claimed to be from an insurance company, but something about him didn't seem right. His blood ran cold. What did this man look like? Tall, thin, well-dressed. He had cold eyes and an unpleasant smile. When I told him I couldn't discuss confidential matters involving parishioners, he became quite aggressive. Father, you need to understand something. The people who killed David are now threatening his mother, and they're looking for this evidence. If they know you have it, you could be in danger. I've been in danger before, mister. I've served in parishes where drug dealers and gang members tried to intimidate me. I'm not afraid of these people. These aren't street criminals, Father. These are people with connections to city government, people with resources and the ability to make problems disappear. David Henderson is proof of that. Father was quiet for a moment, considering words. What do you think we should do with this evidence? We need to get it to the police, but we have to be careful about who we trust. This corruption goes pretty high up the food chain. There's one more thing you should know, Father said. David mentioned that he had sent copies of some of this evidence to a newspaper reporter, someone he thought he could trust to investigate the story properly. Do you know which reporter? A woman named Sarah Martinez at the city newspaper. David said she had a reputation for exposing corruption and that she wasn't afraid to take on powerful people. Carefully packed the evidence back into the metal box. Father, I think you should come with me. If these people know you have the evidence, they'll be back, and next time they might not settle for just asking questions. I can't abandon my parish, mister. These people depend on me. They depend on you being alive. Dead priests can't help anyone. Father looked around his office, at the books and papers that represented years of serving his community. Where would we go? For now, back to the hospital. Dr. Williams can help us figure out our next move, and I need to make sure Charlotte is still safe. As they prepared to leave, Father locked the empty safe and gathered a few personal items. You know, David was right to be afraid, but he was also right to do what he did. Sometimes standing up for what's right is more important than staying safe. They left the church through a side exit, with Father leading through a small garden that connected to the alley behind the building. Kept watch for any suspicious vehicles or people, but the area seemed quiet. As they walked towards car, Father spoke quietly. There's something else you should know about David. In the weeks before his death, he had become increasingly paranoid. He thought he was being followed, and he was afraid his phone was being tapped. He even started varying his route to work and sleeping in different places. Sounds like he had good reason to be paranoid. Yes, but it also means he was thinking like someone who expected to be killed, which makes me wonder if there's more evidence hidden somewhere else. They reached his car, and as he opened the trunk to place the evidence box inside, he noticed a black sedan parked at the end of the block. It was too far away to see the occupants clearly, but something about it made him nervous. "Father, get in the car quickly." As they pulled away from the church, kept checking his mirror. The black sedan followed them for several blocks before turning off onto a side street. Wasn't sure if it had been following them deliberately or if he was just being paranoid, but he decided not to take any chances. Instead of driving directly to the hospital, he took a circuitous route through the city, making several unnecessary turns and stops to see if anyone was following them. When he was satisfied that they were alone, he finally headed toward. "Tell me about this Sarah Martinez," said as they drove. "Do you think she might still be investigating this story?" "I don't know. David spoke with her about 3 months before his death, but I never heard whether she followed up on his information. If she did investigate, there might be additional evidence or witnesses, or she might know something about who was involved in the cover-up." They arrived at the hospital and parked in the employee lot. He carried the evidence box while Father walked beside him, looking somewhat out of place in the sterile hospital environment. Dr. Williams was in her office when knocked on her door. She looked surprised to see Father with him. "Dr. Williams, this is Father from church. We need to talk." Set the evidence box on Dr. Williams' desk and opened it, showing her the documents and photographs inside. As she examined the evidence, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is incredible," she said, holding up one of the inspection reports. "Some of these buildings are in my neighborhood. If these safety violations are real, thousands of people are living and working in death traps." "It gets worse," said, showing her the financial records. "The whole building inspection department was corrupt. Construction companies were paying bribes to get their buildings approved regardless of whether they met safety codes." Dr. Williams picked up one of the photographs, which showed exposed electrical wiring in what appeared to be an apartment building. "This is criminal negligence on a massive scale. How many people have been injured or killed because of this?" "We don't know yet, but I have a feeling the number is higher than we want to imagine." Father spoke up. David was killed because he was going to expose this conspiracy, and now they're threatening his mother to try to get this evidence back. Dr. Williams looked at both men. "We have to go to the police with this immediately." "We will, but first we need to make sure we can trust whoever we're giving it to. This corruption involves city officials, which means it could involve police officials too." His radio crackled to life. "All units, this is dispatch. We have a situation in the long-term care wing. Unauthorized visitors attempting to access patient rooms. Security needed immediately." His heart sank. Charlotte. They were going after Charlotte again, probably because they had figured out that she had remembered where the evidence was hidden. "I have to go," said, grabbing his radio. "Father, stay here with Dr. Williams. Don't let anyone know you have that evidence." Ran for the elevator, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. If those men had come back for Charlotte, and if they were willing to use violence, there was no telling what they might do. The nursing staff wasn't equipped to deal with dangerous criminals, and hospital security might not be enough to stop them. When the elevator reached the 4th floor, could see immediately that something was wrong. The normally quiet hallway was filled with people, nurses, other patients, and hospital security guards. He could hear shouting coming from the direction of Charlotte's room. Pushed through the crowd and saw 2 men in dark suits standing outside Charlotte's door. One was the tall, thin man from the security cameras, and the other was the shorter man with the cold eyes who had threatened the night before. They were arguing loudly with the head nurse, a stern woman named Mrs., who clearly wasn't intimidated by their badges or their aggressive manner. "I don't care who you claim to be," Mrs. was saying. "You cannot interrogate a patient with dementia without proper authorization and medical supervision. Now leave this floor immediately or I'm calling the real police." The shorter man stepped closer to her, his voice low and threatening. "Lady, you don't want to interfere with a federal investigation. We can make your life very difficult." Stepped forward. "There's no federal investigation here. These men are frauds." Both men turned to look at him and could see the anger and frustration in their eyes. They had been so close to getting what they wanted, and now their plan was falling apart. "You again," the shorter man said. "I thought I told you to mind your own business." "Charlotte Henderson is my business, and I know exactly what you're looking for." The two men exchanged a quick glance and could see them calculating their options. They were surrounded by witnesses in the middle of a busy hospital with security guards watching their every move. But they were also desperate, and desperate people did desperate things. "Why don't we go somewhere private and discuss this like civilized people?" the tall man suggested. "I don't think so," replied. "Why don't you two leave the hospital before I have you arrested for threatening elderly patients?" The shorter man's hand moved toward his jacket, and for a moment thought he might be reaching for a weapon. But then he seemed to remember where he was and forced his hand back to his side. "This isn't over," he said quietly so that only could hear him. "We know you have what we're looking for, and we know where to find you." The two men walked away toward the elevator, but knew this was far from over. They had been thwarted again, but they weren't going to give up. They would regroup and try a different approach, and next time they might not be so concerned about witnesses. Checked on Charlotte, who was awake but confused and frightened by all the commotion. He sat with her until she calmed down, then made his way back to Dr. Williams' office. When he arrived, he found Dr. Williams and Father deep in conversation. They looked up when he entered, both of them clearly concerned. "How is Charlotte?" Dr. Williams asked. "Scared but physically unharmed. But those men made it clear that they're not giving up. We need to get this evidence to the police tonight before they try something more drastic." Father held up a business card. "While you were upstairs, I called that reporter David mentioned, Sarah Martinez. She's still working at the city newspaper, and she remembers David contacting her. She said she would be very interested in seeing this evidence." "Did she say whether she had followed up on David's information?" "She started to investigate, but her editor killed the story. Said there wasn't enough evidence to support the allegations. But now, with this box of documents, she thinks she can get the story published." Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair. "A newspaper investigation might be our best option. If we go to the police and the wrong person sees this evidence, it could disappear forever. But if it gets published in the newspaper, it becomes public knowledge, much harder to cover up." Consider their options. A newspaper investigation would certainly expose the corruption, but it might also put Charlotte in even more danger. Once these people realized they couldn't get the evidence back, they might decide to silence the witnesses instead. "What about Charlotte? If this story gets published, those men will know she doesn't have any information they need, but they might also decide she's a liability." "We'll have to make sure she's protected," Dr. Williams said. "I can arrange for round-the-clock security in her room, private security, not hospital security." "And what about Father? They know he had the evidence too." Father smiled grimly. "I've been threatened by experts, mister. I'm not afraid of these amateurs." His phone rang, interrupting their discussion. The caller ID showed it was his ex-wife. He almost ignored the call, but something made him answer. "Thank God you picked up," said, her voice shaking with fear. "There are men at my house asking questions about you. They said they were police officers, but they didn't look like any cops I've ever seen, and they knew things about that they shouldn't know." Was teenage daughter who lived with across town. The thought of those men threatening his family made his blood boil. "What kind of things?" "They knew what school she goes to, what activities she's involved in, what time she usually gets home. I think they were threatening her to get to you." Closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. He had gotten involved in this to protect Charlotte, but now his own family was in danger. "Take and go to your sister's house in Springfield. Don't go home, don't go to work, don't follow your normal routine. I'll call you when it's safe." "What have you gotten yourself into?" "I'll explain everything later. Just get somewhere safe, please." After he hung up, sat in silence for a moment. Dr. Williams and Father were watching him with concern. "They're threatening my family now," said quietly. "My daughter." "All the more reason to get this evidence public as quickly as possible," Father said. "Once the story is published, they'll have no reason to threaten anyone anymore." Nodded, but he knew it wasn't that simple. These people had already killed David Henderson to protect their secret. They wouldn't hesitate to kill others if they felt cornered, and Now's family was in their crosshairs. But there was no turning back now. The evidence in that box represented justice for David Henderson and safety for countless innocent people living and working in unsafe buildings. Had to see this through, no matter what it cost him personally. "Okay," he said, standing up with renewed determination. "Let's call Sarah Martinez and set up a meeting. It's time to bring this whole thing into the light." Sarah Martinez arrived at the hospital just after 8 p.m., her arms full of notebooks and a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of investigative work. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and graying hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail. When she shook hand, her grip was firm and confident. "I have to admit, when Father called me, I thought someone was playing an elaborate prank," she said as they gathered in Dr. Williams' office. "I've been trying to investigate this corruption story for 3 years, ever since David Henderson first contacted me." Place the metal box on the desk between them. "What happened when David first approached you?" Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file folder. "David came to me with allegations about corruption in the building inspection department, but he was too scared to provide any concrete evidence. He said he had documentation, but he wouldn't show it to me. Said he was afraid for his life." "You didn't believe him?" "I believed him, but I couldn't publish a story based on allegations alone. I needed proof. I told David to come back when he was ready to provide evidence, but he never did." "Because he was murdered 2 weeks later," Father said quietly. Sarah's expression grew grim. "I always wondered if his death was connected to what he had told me. When I heard about the car accident, I tried to get the police to investigate further, but they brushed me off. Said it was just a tragic accident and there was no evidence of foul play." Opened the evidence box and began spreading the documents across Dr. Williams' desk. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw the scope of what David had collected. "This is incredible," she breathed, picking up one of the altered inspection reports. "This is exactly the kind of proof I needed 3 years ago." "Can you verify that these documents are authentic?" Dr. Williams asked. "I'll have to do some checking, but these look like genuine city inspection reports. And if they've been altered, that would be easy enough to prove by comparing them to the original files." Sarah continued examining the evidence, her excitement growing with each document she reviewed. "This is going to be a massive story. The corruption goes all the way to the top of the building inspection department, and it involves some of the biggest construction companies in the city." "How long will it take you to verify everything and get the story published?" asked. "If I work through the night, I can have a preliminary story ready for tomorrow's edition, but a full investigation will take weeks. I'll need to interview sources, check records, maybe even inspect some of these buildings myself." "We might not have weeks," said, thinking about the threats to his family. "These people are getting desperate. They've already threatened Charlotte, and now they're going after my daughter." Sarah looked up from the documents with concern. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once this story breaks, there's no going back. These people will know exactly who exposed them." "They already know," Father said. "The question is whether we can get the truth out before they stop us." Dr. Williams had been quiet during the conversation, but now she spoke up. "Sarah, if you publish this story, what kind of response can we expect? Will it force an investigation?" "Absolutely. This level of corruption can't be ignored once it's public. The city will have no choice but to launch a full investigation. The FBI will probably get involved too, since this involves federal safety regulations." "And what about the people responsible? Will they be prosecuted?" "If the evidence holds up, yes. We're talking about bribery, fraud, conspiracy, and potentially manslaughter if anyone was hurt because of these unsafe buildings." Felt a surge of hope. David Henderson's death might finally be avenged, and the people responsible for putting thousands of lives at risk would face justice. But he also knew that cornered animals were the most dangerous. "Sarah, I need you to be very careful with this story. The people involved in this conspiracy have already killed once. They won't hesitate to do it again if they feel threatened." "I've been threatened before. It comes with the territory when you're investigating corruption. I know how to protect myself." "These aren't ordinary corrupt officials. They have resources and connections. They were able to stage David's murder to look like an accident and convince the police not to investigate further." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. You're right to be concerned, but that's exactly why this story needs to be told. If we don't expose them, how many more people will die? His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his ex-wife, safe at my sister's house with, but these men called my work and asked my boss about my schedule. They're not giving up. Showed the message to the others. Dr. Williams shook her head in disgust. This is harassment and intimidation. We should go to the police right now. And tell them what? Asked. That some men claiming to be federal agents are asking questions about me and my family. Without proof of what they're really doing, the police will just tell us to file a complaint. But we do have proof, Father said, pointing to the evidence box. We have proof of a massive conspiracy that these men are trying to cover up. Sarah was taking notes as they talked. This harassment angle actually strengthens the story. It shows that the people involved are actively trying to silence witnesses and intimidate anyone who might expose them. Can you include that in your article? Asked. Absolutely. In fact, it might be smart to get your story on the record now, while we're all here together. I can interview each of you about your experiences with these men. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah interviewed Dr. Williams and Father about everything that had happened. She recorded their statements and took detailed notes about the threats, the visits to Charlotte, and the attempt to cover up the evidence. This is going to be a powerful story, she said when they were finished. But I have to warn you, once it's published, you're all going to be in the spotlight. There will probably be follow-up investigations, maybe congressional hearings. Are you prepared for that? Thought about his quiet life as a hospital security guard. In less than a week, he had gone from walking empty hallways at night to being at the center of a major corruption scandal. But when he thought about Charlotte's fear, about his daughter being threatened, about David Henderson's murder, he knew he didn't have a choice. I'm ready, he said. So am I, Father added. Dr. Williams nodded her agreement. Sarah packed up her notes and the copies of evidence that had made for her. I'm going back to the newspaper now to start writing. I'll work through the night to get this story ready for tomorrow's edition. What about the original evidence? Asked, looking at the metal box. Keep it safe. I have copies of everything I need for now, but we'll probably need the originals for any legal proceedings that follow. After Sarah left, the three of them sat in Dr. Williams' office, each lost in their own thoughts. Felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. They had finally taken the step that would expose the truth, but they had also made themselves targets. We should probably consider our safety for the next few days, Dr. Williams said. Once that article comes out, these people are going to be very angry. I'm going to stay at the church tonight, Father said. If they want to find me, they can come to God's house. That might not be the safest place, warned. Perhaps not, but it's where I belong. Besides, I have a feeling that once this story breaks, these men will have bigger problems to worry about than threatening an old priest. Checked his watch. It was almost 11 p.m. I should go check on Charlotte one more time before my shift ends. They made their way up to the 4th floor, where the long-term care wing was quiet and dimly lit. Had arranged for a private security guard to watch Charlotte's room, and he was relieved to see the man at his post, alert and professional. Charlotte was sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in a way that hadn't seen in days. The stress and fear that had been etched in her features seemed to have faded, at least temporarily. She seems better, Dr. Williams observed quietly. Maybe she knows somehow that help is coming, Father suggested. Sometimes people can sense when a burden is about to be lifted. Hoped he was right. Charlotte had been through enough trauma for one lifetime. She deserved to spend her remaining years in peace, without fear of men in dark suits threatening her and the people she cared about. As they prepared to leave, his radio crackled with a message from hospital security. This is dispatch. We have reports of suspicious vehicles in the parking lot. Can you investigate? Looked at Dr. Williams and Father. You two should go home. I'll handle this. I don't think you should be alone, Dr. Williams said. If those men are out there. I'll be careful, but I need to make sure the hospital is secure. Made his way down to the main lobby and then outside to the parking lot. The night air was cool and crisp, with a full moon casting long shadows between the rows of cars. He walked slowly through the lot, his hand resting on his radio in case he needed to call for backup. Near the far end of the lot, he spotted two dark sedans parked side by side. They looked out of place among the older cars that most hospital employees drove. As approached, he could see figures sitting in both vehicles, but the tinted windows made it impossible to see details. His radio crackled again. "This is dispatch. We just received a call from someone claiming to be FBI asking about our security procedures and staff schedules." Felt his blood run cold. These people weren't just watching the hospital, they were gathering intelligence about security protocols. That suggested they were planning something more aggressive than just visiting Charlotte during regular hours. He was about to call for backup when one of the sedan doors opened. The tall, thin man from the security cameras stepped out and began walking toward him. His first instinct was to run, but he was too far from the hospital entrance and there was nowhere to hide in the open parking lot. "Mister," the man called out as he approached, "I think it's time we had a conversation." Kept his distance, his hand still on his radio. "I don't have anything to say to you." "Oh, I think you do. You see, we know you've been busy tonight. We know about your meeting with the priest and the doctor. We even know about your little chat with the newspaper reporter." Felt his heart sink. They had been watching the hospital, probably monitoring everyone who went in and out. Sarah Martinez might be in danger too. "What do you want?" "We want what David Henderson stole from us, and we want to make sure that certain stories don't get published in tomorrow's newspaper." "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smiled coldly. "Please, mister, we're not stupid. We know you found Henderson's evidence. We know you gave copies to the reporter. And we know that if that story gets published, a lot of important people are going to be very unhappy. Important people who should be in prison for corruption and murder. Important people who have the power to make your life, and your daughter's life, very unpleasant if they don't get what they want." Felt anger rising in his chest. "Leave my family out of this." "That's entirely up to you. You have a choice to make, mister. You can retrieve the evidence from wherever you've hidden it and convince your reporter friend to kill her story. In exchange, your family will be safe and you can go back to your quiet life as a security guard. And if I refuse, then tomorrow's newspaper will have a very different front-page story. Something about a tragic accident involving a security guard who tried to interfere in matters beyond his understanding. Realized that these men had no intention of letting him live, regardless of what he did. They couldn't afford to leave witnesses, especially witnesses who knew the truth about David Henderson's murder. "I'll need time to think about it," said, stalling while he tried to figure out his next move. "You have until midnight. That gives us enough time to stop the newspaper's printing presses if necessary." The man turned and walked back toward his sedan, watched as both cars drove away, their headlights disappearing into the night. He stood alone in the parking lot, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. But as he thought about David Henderson, about Charlotte's fear, about all the innocent people living and working in unsafe buildings, realized there really wasn't a choice at all. Some things were more important than personal safety, even when that meant risking the lives of the people he loved most. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah Martinez. "Sarah, how's the story coming?" "Almost finished. I should have it filed within the hour." "Why?" "Because they know about it."